strong like the oak. Down a long dirt road, surrounded by tall trees and chirping crickets, near a small creek where frogs croaked and fish splashed, there was a little white house with an enormous oak tree in the front yard. The oak made everything around it look small, its gnarled roots spreading like massive wooden fingers, its ancient trunk wide and rough, and its branches reaching toward the sky, each branch and leaf competing to touch the sun. The tree had watched generations go by. It had been there when horses carried passengers to town to buy supplies. It had watched the first car in the county take a back seat full of children to the river. It had been there through the sorrow of a civil war, the uncertainty of the Great Depression, the pain of parents sending their children off to wars around the world, the happiness of countless harvests, and the slow changing of the world. And now, it was here to welcome a new generation. In early spring, the man and his wife held their newborn daughter under the shade of that mighty oak. They carried her in like a secret they had been waiting for. Dark hair in a tufted swirl, fists like tiny knots, eyes as bright as the morning sun. Sunlight sifted through 100,000 leaves. The mother lowered the baby onto a folded quilt by the window. The infant peered up. The oak's green lattice trembled with the wind. Light peaks fell over her cheeks like little kisses. Her father whispered, "Welcome home." By 3, she had a laugh like a wind chime and knees that always wore grass stains. Her brothers tumbled around the gnarled roots with her, inventing kingdoms and chase games. The oak shade was like 2 enormous arms embracing all who gathered there, and they were constantly beneath it, rolling, laughing, and playing. The little girl learned to step from root to root, balancing off the knobs as if crossing a river, arms out, brothers cheering. When she slipped, bark rasped her palms, and she cried for a minute, but her pain lasted only a moment before she was ready to join the next game. Beneath that cathedral of leaves, they named lizards, traced ants, and measured summer by the buzz of dragonflies and the flash of lightning bugs. In late summer, they shucked corn and shelled peas in a family circle under the oak. Their father had coaxed the ears from the soil with drops of sweat and the strength of his hands. Shucks whispered and fell to their feet, pale green ribbons. Peas rattled into enamel pans like a soft rain. The girl's thumbnail found the seam by touch alone. "We don't rush an evening like this," her mother said. "We sing it through." And so they did. Old tunes in imperfect harmony. Squirrels scolded from aloft. A hawk darted through the sky. The sun slid down, and the pile grew. Here they learned the lessons of what matters most: work, patience, and the toil of hands in common purpose taste the sweetest. On lazy Saturday afternoons, she read on her back with a paperback propped against her knees. The story was sad, and the hero's loss was almost unimaginable. Tears fell and slipped into her hairline, salty lines tracing across her face. Yet the oak gave shade like a steady friend. Wind made the leaves murmur like the hush of 1,000 little comforts. She pressed her cheek against the rough roots and began to think about the years the oak had stood there. "It's hard to picture what you've seen," she whispered to the tree. She didn't know the tree's age, only that the oak had been there before the roads and rivers had a name, and would outlast whatever names came next. She pictured the rings inside the tree trunk, like the grooves on a record, each one a song the tree knew by heart. The trunk's broad whorls fit her palm like map lines. Sometimes she pressed an ear to the bark as if listening for a heartbeat, but heard only bugs and birds. The house creaked softly in the afternoon heat, the porch boards popping like popcorn kernels. "You're old," she told the tree, "but you don't feel tired." The leaves answered with a clatter as a gentle breeze blew. Even school was tolerable under the branches of the oak. chalk dust and spelling tests, the shy hope to face what she didn't know. Yet, when lessons overwhelmed her, she brought her workbook outside. On the porch steps, numbers behaved. Under the oak, sums made sense. Her mother checked answers between sips of sweet tea. Patterns are everywhere, Mom said, pointing to the crosshatch of branches, the ladder of roots. The girl traced multiplication tables with a stick in the dirt. Above, a mockingbird stitched other bird songs together, proving that everything can be learned, borrowed, and made your own. After their schoolwork was finished, her youngest brother was a brave knight, fighting off a band of bandits with a butter knife sword and chasing them around the tree. Her older brother crafted a rope swing from an old tire, knots tested, a branch chosen with calculated caution. She begged for a turn, the cool tire against her stomach as she pushed off and felt the kind of weightless flight that makes you feel free and happy. The tire's arc carried her past the eaves, high enough to meet sunlight, then low enough to see the ant parade. When she dragged her toes to slow her descent, the oak held all their laughter, like the high ceiling of a country church. Winters were a short sentence in a long story, but they came, crisp as an apple, briefer than breath on a mirror. The oak shed leaves in a carpet resembling thousands of copper pennies. She crunch-stomped and made tunnels for toy trucks. The White House shone brighter without the green hue of the leaves, and the bones of the branches revealed themselves, twisted angles and joints, a scaffolding of endurance. Her father chopped wood for the hungry fireplace. Her mother simmered stew. Under bare limbs, they threw pine cones at a tin bucket, and the ping was a bright bell in the cool air. The oak, though barer, was not less. Even reduced, it was mighty. Summer returned with generosity. Lemonade rings dotted the porch's wooden slats. Cousins came to visit. Heat lightning cracked the sky, and the oak stitched a vast quilt of shade all day long. The young girl learned the sweetness of a cold washcloth on the neck, and how dirt tastes when you laugh mid-fall. A cicada shell clung to bark like a tiny empty suit. She touched it, careful not to crush it, then tucked it into a pocket like a small treasure. Under the oak, small things seemed more significant. She grew taller and quieter. Teenage years folded her life into new shapes. Sometimes the house felt too small for her feelings, but the oak had room. She sat on a thick root and watched cardinals bicker. One late afternoon, she shared that root with a brown-eyed boy. He was handsome and kind, and though the flutter of her heart was new, the familiarity of the setting was a comfort for her angst and doubt. He pointed out the squirrels flitting from branch to branch. She laced her fingers through his. They carved initials, 4 letters and a heart, into the tree. She felt guilty about it for a week, but the oak didn't protest. It had seen enough promises to know which ones might grow. With backs against the trunk, they spoke of miles, colleges, and jobs, of wanting to leave, if only to learn how to come home. Their laughter was pure, and their feelings were true. Somewhere in those evenings, love stopped being a thought and became a reality, as dependable as shade on a sunny afternoon. Then things changed. The change of a job, the move to a different house, the soft echoes in the empty white home. Vines climbed the porch rail, making their way up to the roof like they were hiding some secret. Windows were covered in a thick layer of dust, but the oak still threw its mighty arms wide, casting shade over the yard as if saving a seat. Years slipped by, jobs that worked and didn't, money that came and went like a bird at the feeder, and then the opportunity to return to the familiar came. She took it without hesitation. One morning, they steered into the old drive, tires crackling over clay and rocks, and parked beneath the mighty oak. "We're home," she said. Nieces and nephews learned the tire swing's high arch and blissful journey. Family gatherings lazed into long afternoons, pound cakes in the old cake tin, potato salad in a big yellow bowl, watermelon carved into large smiles, and laughter carrying down the steps. Her brothers took turns telling versions of the same old fishing story, but none of them were true, and all of them were right. Babies napped on quilts, milk-drunk and angel-faced. The oak's branches seemed to hold the sky in place so the day wouldn't tumble too fast. In those happy moments, it was like time was redefined. Evenings brought a hush that amplified every sound. Rocking chairs creaked like contented sighs. The siblings, reminiscing about their shared childhood, sat on the porch and talked about their children's victories and failures. Someone strummed a guitar. Someone else snapped beans into an old enamel pan. The oak kept watch, a patient sentry. Fireflies arrived like punctuation marks in the dusk. And when the porch light clicked on, it did not mean the day was over. Oftentimes, it meant that the joy of togetherness was merely beginning. Most days were work days. Laundry trailed like flags, dishes stacked like tiny towers by the sink, homework spread open and stubborn. He fixed what creaked, she organized what sprawled, and the children argued and then apologized and then argued again. And yet, in the oak shade, her kids found the same magic that she had experienced years ago. A fallen branch became a pirate's mast, an old rusty spoon became a shovel, a pile of leaves became a trampoline. They found a place to belong. Storms had come before, nature's tantrums that shook and passed, but this storm felt different. The afternoon sky turned the color of an old bruise. Birds went quiet. She checked flashlights, gathered candles, and filled containers with water in case the power went out. The children brought in the porch plants. The wind battered the house before the first drop fell, and when the rain did arrive, it fell in heavy drops that plowed rivers through the yard. The power flickered and then left them completely. Soon the twinkle of candles was their only comfort from the deep darkness. Rain fell in sheets, then ropes, then walls. Wind howled and pressed its fingers against the window panes. Doors rattled. The roof sounded like a troubled sleeper turning over in a creaking bed. They gathered in the living room under an old quilt, and the youngest hooked his face against her arm. "Lord," she prayed softly, "help me and my family to be safe." She felt peace come over her as her family gathered close. She knew that no matter what, it would be okay. The house seemed to be making its own pleas. Boards and tin protested loudly. The oak had lived through hundreds of storms through its life. Its roots were deep and its trunk thick. Even so, as the wind pressed against it in unrelenting ferocity, its trunk began to groan, and its branches sounded like thousands of little flutes whistling with each gust. The noise came as if the sky itself had been ripped open. First, a crack like the world had been broken in half, then a hammering of snaps. Their eyes met, that look loved ones share when something unthinkable becomes reality. The oak was falling. Through the windows, shadows reared as lightning lit up the world. Vast, antlered shapes of branch upon branch, each a heavy blow upon the hand-sawn timbers that constructed the frame of the old house. The first impact shook the pictures from the wall. The second split the ceiling. Plaster dust turned the air to fog. They ducked, grabbed for each other, dove to the floor as the old oak descended like the crash of an earthquake in the dark of the night. The world compressed into dimness and thuds and the brutal clutches of fear. A limb speared the floor behind them as the candle flames disappeared with the howl of the wind as it hungrily accessed the house's interior. A cupboard opened and gave its plates up in a jingling crash. She wrapped her arms around whoever was nearest. His hand found hers in the dark. Her prayer became smaller and fiercer. Keep us. Wood settled like a giant catching its breath. Somewhere in the storm's throat, a quieter space formed. It was enough to listen to one another breathe. The storm limped away with the dawn. As light finally crawled into the edge of their world, they saw the roof dismantled, the living room turned into a nest of bark and beams, and the small dining room baptized in muck and splinters. They crawled out from under the slanted ceiling, climbed over a rib cage of limbs, and stood in what remained of their lives. The oak lay across the house like a felled titan, branches still leafed, beautiful even in defeat. Around them other trees were shattered, as if they'd been hit with several thousand cannonballs. Barns had folded. The horizon looked oddly bare. "We're here," she said quietly. "We're here." They soon saw neighbors emerging from the shambles of their own lives. By mid-morning, trucks slowly made their way down roads choked with trees. Chainsaws sounded in the distance. Siblings, cousins, grandparents, faces she knew as well as her own hands, walked the broken yard and then made a circle together. They hugged, tight and with no hint of hurry. They stood beneath the quiet bulk of the fallen oak and exhaled together. Gratitude became a strange symbol, drawing them in, awkward and irresistible. They kissed foreheads. They praised God that they could hold each other near. "Everyone's okay," they kept repeating in muted tones of shock. Soon work began. Words failed them, but action showed their love. Yet even as saws started and tarps were hauled, stories rose up like smoke. The brothers remembered the rope swing and how they had pushed her so high that they were afraid she'd go over the top limb of the tree. Grandma told how she and their great-grandmother had once shelled peas on the old wooden swing, singing songs and sharing memories. Her father arrived, quiet-eyed, and placed a palm on the oak's bark like a man might touch an old friend's shoulder. Everyone added their own chapter to the history of what had been. At first, there was bitterness. The old oak, beloved keeper of shade and secrets, had crushed their home and smashed their table, the one where they had shared hundreds of meals together. It wasn't fair. She said as much and let the tears come hard, but standing in that ruin, surrounded by the hands that had built her life, something within her tilted toward understanding. The oak had fallen, yes. The house was crushed beyond repair, but there was so much more to the story. She touched the bark, rough and familiar, and found the tiny scar of their carved initials from years ago. The letters were wider now, wrinkled into the tree's aging. She traced them with a fingertip. "You gave us shade and stories," she said to the oak, "and now you've given us the clearest one." The lesson wasn't that trees live forever or houses never break. Their family had been built here, piece by ordinary piece, and would stand even when beams didn't. The oak's final act had not been destruction. It had been revelation. What is made under the shade of an outstretched limb lasts beyond the storm. Even when life's seemingly unfailing roots fail and permanence becomes memory, there are some things stronger than an oak or a storm. Among them, love, hope, and family. After all, the house could be rebuilt. Maybe not the same, but filled with the same love. Their children could once again race a length of yard under a new, young sapling planted near the old stump. a live oak in training with a name already waiting: Hope. On Saturdays, the family could still gather, nibble watermelon, tell the old stories, and add new ones. They would carry forward the lesson that had steadied them through the longest night. We are as strong as the family we build, roots buried deeper than the touch of the storm, branches outstretched to the light. And no wind, however brash, can unmake what love has shaped beneath the sheltering boughs of home.